you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for having us. It's such a joy to share what we did because it was such a learning experience. As Sister Quincy said, she took you through kind of what we shared with others, because it was important for us to educate people regarding what the tax bill would do to them. But it was just as important for us to learn from them what they heard, once they heard what it was going to do, how that was going to impact them, and what they thought some solutions might be. We did this. So we talked about it. So what my job's going to be is kind of tell you where we went, who we met with, and what we learned. Generally speaking, where we went was to programs filled with hope, run by people filled with faith, who taught us how to love one another as our own children, who taught us more specifically, and I think Representative Plum would agree with us, is that economically, pragmatically, we all do better when we all do better. It's just that simple. The modalities of learning for us were rallies, canvassing, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the canvassing because it was a pretty interesting experience. Roundtables, and we'll go through the site visits because those were our most profound learnings. The rallies, basically people stood up as any rally and they explained what was going on in their neighborhood. They called out their elected officials to address the issues that were happening and to correlate it to what's going to happen worse as a result of this tax bill. The canvassing, we canvassed in Las Vegas. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Roundtables, we sat with community leaders and representatives. This picture here is Representative Clyburn. We had met with many female leaders in his district, and they talked about the problems and the solutions that they had, and it was a real democracy at work. The elected officials were listening to the people, the change makers of their area, and he had a lot of experience where he could explain to them what decisions he had made and decisions that still needed to be made. It was quite enlightening. And lastly, we're going to talk about the site visits that we saw, which are the most interesting. The site visits I think you're going to enjoy the most out of my part of the presentation, because the site visits were clearly people doing good for other people, and it was just successful programs which stopped trying to treat one part of poverty but tried to restore dignity to a person, and they succeeded. And that's the story you need to hear. So in Las Vegas, we canvassed with the Culinary Workers Union, number 57. The most interesting part about this is that most of the casinos are unionized. However, there's a family that owns about 10 casinos there. Their people, or their workers rather, had voted. Their cards were filled out. The NLRB had certified it. They'd gone to the court to demand that the employer come to the bargaining table. And this owner, this family that owns these casinos, simply refuses. They're wholly in contempt. The representative wouldn't help them. So while most of the people in Vegas were unionized, they didn't just say, I got mine, see you later. They recognized that these workers at these other 10 casinos were still being treated unfairly. We're still living in an unjust situation. So what they did was they all came together and they were canvassing to get a better representative who will represent the unions better. But they took political leave. Now they take less money to do this, but they come and they canvass in an area that is not unionized or that is not pro-union. What they basically say is, I'm going to take a little bit more because you are being so improperly treated. Again, it's a community being there for each other. When one suffers, we all suffer. So they got down in the dirt with them. And we did too for this day. We went and we visited people's homes, and we tried to get them to pay attention to the electoral process. Then we went on our site visits. And the site visits, as I said, are the most touching to me because the site visits are just so different. I've been on all five of the 6 nuns on the bus. I was working in network in 2012, and I'm working there now again. But when we went out in 2012, we had the same mantra, reasonable revenue for responsible programs. But we looked at the programs then. We wanted to see who was doing what. This time, given the tax law, we went out there to demand reasonable revenue. But we had to see what they were doing. So we went out there, and what we found was people no longer are doing hunger. Nobody's doing housing. It may be the topic that they choose to, but the reality is when you enter their programs, they do a full intake. And any issue you are suffering from that's impeding your housing, your health care, or your way back to a dignified life, they treat it all. They're treating the entire person. What they're doing is no longer taking a symptom of poverty, but trying to cure the disease of poverty. And we saw this over and over again. And the aim is always dignity of the person. I think the best way of doing good to the poor is not making them easy in poverty, but leading or driving them out of it. And I think Benjamin Franklin had it right. And I think our site visit showed that too. We visited programs that lifted or drove people out of poverty by addressing health care, their immigration status, or their access to citizenship, homelessness, hunger, and criminal justice reform. You can't see this because it's not coming out right, but we went to see the Human Services campus in Phoenix, Arizona. And the neat thing about this is it's a 13-acre campus. It's a gated community for homeless people. It really turns the table. I'm a daughter of charity, and one of the first things we learn in treating or serving the poor is to see Jesus Christ in the poor. So for me, going in there and seeing how Jesus Christ was being treated as he was intended to be treated was particularly beautiful. They treated everything, this is their entrance kind of check off. You get greeted at a welcoming center. They look, and the first thing that most homeless people don't have is an ID, right? They've lived on the streets, they lose their ID, it's very difficult to find. They can't get an ID mailed to them because they don't have an address. So they provide an ID, they provide an address for them, they have a post office in this 13-acre campus. Then they address their income. They go through with them. There's St. Joseph's the Worker. There are 13 different organizations within this place, and they address everything from Social Security, if you have that coming to you, because the Department of Economic Security is there. They'll apply for your benefits, SSI, SSDI. They have Oak Rehab. They have clothes to give you if you need clothes to go to work. They hook you up with jobs according to your limitations or your abilities. They teach them how to save money. They also have a state-of-the-art dental, which was my most happiest moment to see. It was the best dentist office I've ever been in, and they're doing this again for our impoverished brothers and sisters. The healthcare was equally as inspiring. And they had, at the end of the day, and since October 2017, they have had 358 people they call on the diversion plan. These are people who come to them being homeless, and they find out how they can connect them back with their families or back with people they know. So they put 358 people back in connection with their families and housing, and they have 85% of them are remaining stable with that, rejoining with their family. It doesn't get more beautiful than that. Then we went to the Hope, not then, but one of the visits we went to was the Hope Community Center in Apopka, Florida, right in Mr. Trump's backyard there by Mar-a-Lago. It's an immigration justice place. When we pulled up to the place, we were met with just a bunch of young people with Mariposas, butterfly advocacy signs saying, "Welcome, justice for the immigrants." They have a campesino garden, and they took us to that, where the farmers of color, they called it. They let them farm because they no longer can do that. That's what they did in their home countries, but when they get here, of course, you don't have document status, you can't very well buy land and you can't continue to farm. So they enabled the people to do that. And then we saw a visual experience by the young people who are DACA recipients or would-be DACA recipients. It was emotionally raw. These children showed us their fear of parental abandonment by deportation, the violence they suffer from being different, and just the anger that they feel of being so different and being treated so badly. But then how they showed us how they responded with creativity, joy, hope-filled, and mostly community and camaraderie. These kids were looking out for each other, looking out for their parents, and looking out for their future in a very dark time. It's heartbreaking to see these children who are so young have seen so much horror and so much fear. But yet how they responded to it is a lesson to us all, because they responded with happiness and joy. It's not gonna go back. And another program we visited, this is the last one I'll review, is Chopping for Change. The Lutheran Ministry Services in Cleveland has a program where they help people either once they've gotten out or while they're still in prison. Once they've gotten out, they give them resume building, job, vocation training. They walk with them. As John was saying, it's important to walk with people who are walking in the dark and they don't know where they're going. So they stay walking with them. But one particular program they have is Chopping for Change. This lady right here, all of them are in prison for felonies. They have to jump through some hoops, I'm sure, to get into this program. But what this place does, Chopped for Change, is a program where they teach them culinary skills and they teach them restaurateur business. So they have a 2-year program now where these ladies can get a 2-year degree. They have hooked up with a 5-star restaurant. So when the ladies get to the end of their training, they do clinicals. So they go to this 5-star restaurant, they practice there, and then they can get a job there. This lady here was getting out in March and she was gonna work at a 5-star restaurant. She was gonna be able to provide for her children for the first time in 8 years and see them. The other young lady was getting the bachelor's degree in restaurateur. So they had taken people and they'd given them real rehab